And happy Wednesday to the world. Thank you for all the people that are actually watching us live because we got a couple of viewers here. We are the Seahawks Fantasy Podcast. With me is Zeb. Zeb, good evening.
Hello there, Sammy. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Ross, unfortunately, was not able to join us today. He works in different time zones and he's working. We had two guests scheduled. One of them, JG from the Northwest. You can find him on Twitter. He's still at work trying to get some food, so he's trying to pop in. He's hopefully on his way, so he'll be able to join us for most of the podcast. You also scheduled Matty F. Brown from Inside the Pylon to join us, but I think maybe he passed out, so we'll see if he jumps on or not. But happy almost draft day, Zeb.
Man, I'm excited.
Are you excited? Because I'm looking at the number of picks that they have. They've got 9, but they go from the 18th pick to the 120th pick. That's a really big gap.
Well, I'm not excited for Friday yet. Obviously, that could all completely change. But I'm definitely excited for tomorrow, Thursday, the first round, and excited for the big haul on Saturday.
Yeah.
We're bound to bring in 6, 7, 8 guys that day, you know. So
yeah, eight draft picks in the 4th, 5th, and 7th round. So it's 1 pick in the 4th, it's 4 picks in the 5th, and 3 in the 7th. And all of those picks they can trade. So they've got a lot of people to move up.
The 5th is our lucky round, man.
Yeah, I mean they got 4 picks in the 5th, so that's a positive thing. So JG just sent us a note, so drive safely, dude. But he says heading home, he's gonna grab some food and he'll hop on. So he'll hopefully get to us by topic number 1. But yeah, I mean the draft I think is something that's always really interesting because I feel like the Seahawks have always been in this position where the draft is not so much about like infusing it with this rich talent because they already had so much talent. And that's kind of come into question of like, hey, do we have star players that we've drafted, or are we always relying on the people that we drafted kind of, right when Russell Wilson joined that 2010, 2011, and 2012 draft? That's our first topic, but that's kind of always been that big question. So I'm excited for that because I always think that every draft pick the Seahawks select are always going to be stars.
Right, of course.
I mean,
superstars.
Yeah.
Nobody else saw it, but the Seahawks saw it.
Yeah, I mean, they had that trend for so long. It's like, why would you doubt that? But I mean, that at some point, we're not like Browns fans hoping that every pick is going to be finally the pick that's going to turn the corner, or the Seahawks have been a really good team for these past 6 years, and even though they missed this playoffs this last year, they were still on the verge. They were competitive. They weren't like, it was more of their own doing that caused them to miss the playoffs than anything else. I wouldn't say it's a huge personnel issue, but injuries and, maybe a kicker are the only things holding them back. As flawed as that team was.
We don't need a guy to come. We don't need like a savior to come in and change things for us. We need some guys to help us fill some potholes and maybe get some new windshield wipers going so we can see a little clearer. We don't need necessarily anybody new to drive. We just need some assistance.
So if that's the case, if we kind of piggyback off that metaphor here, Zeb, what are we driving towards this 2018 season? Are we like Prius, practical, steady, you know what you're going to get, not flashy, not sexy? Or are we maybe like a mid-size SUV, a little bit older, but, people still rock it, and, you could still tint the windows out, put some nice rims on it. People are like, oh, that's not so bad.
No, I think we're like a 2014 like a high-end Beamer. Like we're buying it used, so we don't necessarily know how well it's going to work, but it's a really nice car, low mileage. But it's used, so we never know how it was treated by its former owner or what kind of problems it could be coming with.
Lots of question marks. Lots of questionable, like, is that a stain or is that a sunspot? What is that
exactly.
in the photo?
We're going to have to get it on the road and put some miles on it and see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fun thing about the season. Like you said, I still expect the Seahawks to be a good team. I don't think that they're going to draft any one person all of a sudden is going to make a huge impact. It's not going to be like a Russell Wilson. That's a one in a lifetime kind of a pick, and I can't even recall for me in my lifetime being aware of drafting a guy like a Russell Wilson and I'm being able to see him play. Obviously, we had guys like Steve Largent and Walter Jones and Cortez Kennedy, but those were never like, I wasn't like the biggest fan when any of those guys were drafted, let alone, alive for some of them. But those guys are such big mainstays, but I don't know if that's something you could ever appreciate in the moment. I feel like with Russell Wilson, you can appreciate his greatness in the moment.
Yeah, totally. I mean, he was by that third preseason game against the Chiefs, it was like, oh, maybe they did know what they were doing. And by about mid-season, we had what mostly felt like a veteran, a leader of the team. The guy that was actually going to be able to take things to the next level. It felt that way. You could feel it. So yeah, you're absolutely right, and it worked.
Well, let's just jump into topic number one, because this is a good segue. Topic number one is, have the Seahawks completely changed their draft philosophy from the 2010 to 2012 draft class? That's a draft class that had Russell Okung, Earl Thomas, Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, Russell Wilson, Bruce Irvin, Golden Tate. Basically a bunch of guys that were super young, super great on that Super Bowl run from Super Bowls and playoffs. That's from the 2010 to 2012 class. Then you have the 2013 to 2017, so that's 5 years of drafts. So only one player is a Pro Bowler, and they were a special teams Pro Bowler and Tyler Lockett. So it's kind of a tough question, but a lot of people question if the Seahawks, if the Pete Carroll and John Schneider have lost their edge. Zeb, do you feel as if there's been a change in the way they're drafting people? What maybe is the difference? Why aren't we seeing superstars coming out of these last 5 drafts that we are seeing right now?
Well, I to my eyes, to my amateur draft viewing eyes, I don't feel like the philosophy has changed too much. It kind of feels like they're doing about the same kind of stuff. Now back in 2010, 2011, going into 2012, we had relatively early first round picks, especially in 10 in particular. We were able to get some real impact guys right up front.
Yeah.
But since then, since the team has now traditionally drafted in the lower half towards the end of the first round, I think their kind of philosophy of backing off, stacking some extra picks, which for the most part is what we've done over the last 5 or 6 years. I feel like that philosophy has stayed mostly the same. Last year, obviously, was a little bit different with actually making a pick in the first round.
Right.
But
it was actually two years ago. So it was Jermaine Ifedi is the last first round, but last year they traded twice out of the first round.
Okay. Yeah. What I think that I believe, which has been shot down by infallible experts like Kip Earlywine, if you're familiar, is that in those early years, and this is from Pete Carroll's mouth, these are his exact words, he was drafting guys that he'd scouted for college. I just believe that he had such an intimate knowledge of the guys coming out for those years that it was much easier for him to recognize the real talent that maybe had gone unnoticed by a lot of other teams. Then you go to 2013, and he's 3 or 4 years removed from that, and I think he lost that edge. I think he had that in those first few seasons, and that is why they were able to hit so hard on a lot of those, especially those later round draft picks. To me, that just makes sense. And like I said, from his mouth, he said that. He said it himself. I think it was going into the 14 season during the, the townhouse or the whatever they do during the offseason, where he has the whole crowd in and he talks to the crowd for an hour and a half or so about the upcoming season and whatnot. He said it himself, that I don't have that connection anymore. And I think it's shown with the way they've drafted over the last 3 or 4 years.
I kind of question that. So I'm gonna go off that point first. I question if that is a viable reason why they're not as successful in recent years compared to when Pete first came on the scene. And the reason being is he did not draft any USC guys his entire time in those first three drafts, right? None of the players that the Seahawks acquired from 2010 to 2012 was from USC. That also means that the guys that they drafted were most likely from other schools. From what I remember, Pete Carroll only coached at USC. He might have scouted other players, but he didn't coach those other players, you know? So to say that just because he was a college coach, what is their opportunity to really say, like, oh, I'm going to look at a guy like Notre Dame and Golden Tate and figure out, hey, what would it be like if this guy were on the USC team? This is how I would coach him. This is how I'd use him. I highly doubt that that's the philosophy. Now, maybe he scouted Golden Tate, you know, like before he got, you know, when he was getting recruited. I know that he did that with Percy Harvin. There's a clip of Percy Harvin and Pete Carroll meeting the year before in 2012 when they drafted. When you know he's talking about and say like, hey, I really wanted you to come to USC. You ended up going to Florida. You know, like missed out. And then they joke and he ends up joining the Seahawks.
Right.
But that's like the closest thing that I've ever heard. Like, yeah, I know Pete Carroll's saying this. Like, yeah, he doesn't have that insight anymore. But there's thousands and thousands of college football players. There's no way that even if you're looking at just the top 500 of those players, he's going to have better knowledge than a GM like John Schneider, who's been a GM and an advanced scout for such a long time. So I have a hard time believing that was like the one lone edge, because I don't recall them like USC playing Oklahoma, and that's why they drafted Russell Okung. I think they drafted Russell Okung because he was the highest rated tackle available, him and Trent Williams. So I have a hard time with that, because another thing is they drafted Earl Thomas with the 15th pick in 2010. They had a chance to draft a Seattle guy, Taylor Mays, who went to USC, ended up getting drafted in the second round by the Niners, I believe. And, everyone kind of thought, oh, USC, Taylor Mays, Seattle kid. Well, yeah, Pete Carroll's going to grab this guy. And he let him slide and slide and slide, and ended up another team took him. So I have a hard time believing that was really the edge that separated Pete Carroll in these first few drafts and John Schneider in their first few drafts versus the past 5 years.
Well, let me say I don't know that I believe it's the edge, but I think it was an edge, and I think if you look,
it's a really tiny edge, bro.
A little bit closer. So look, when so the guys he coached at USC, he knew quite well whether or not he wanted them to come to Seattle. Like,
for sure.
He knew that Taylor Mays was not the guy he wanted to come play for him.
Right.
He also knew that he wanted Lendale White to come in, and he wanted Mike Williams to come in. He brought those guys. He didn't draft them because they had already been drafted when he came here, but he brought them in because those were guys that he liked from coaching. Now, guys like Percy Harvin's a perfect example. Marshawn Lynch is a perfect example. Richard Sherman, Doug Baldwin. These are guys that he scouted and or recruited in before college that didn't come to USC. So what I'm saying is that he recognized these talents and wanted those guys in because he wanted them in originally, didn't get them for school, but when it comes to the league, now he has an opportunity to get those guys in, guys that had a talent or a something about them that he liked enough to want to bring them in to Seattle, even though he didn't have the opportunity to coach them in college.
That's actually a really great point, because Doug Baldwin and Richard Sherman, they helped each other go to Seattle, because Richard Sherman got drafted by the Seahawks. Doug Baldwin was undrafted free agent. Richard Sherman told him, come to Seattle. You love the program. Sign with us. He kind of like really recruited Doug Baldwin to come to Seattle over other teams. So I definitely do think there is some value. I think it's overstepped in regards to how much of an impact it made, because
I think with a few of the guys that they hit on, they weren't expected to hit on. I think that plays a role. Not Earl, not Okung, you know what I mean? Not necessarily the guys that they hit on in the early rounds, but some of the more sleeper picks and the undrafted free agents and that sort of thing. And again, like you said, the opposite, why he didn't bring in guys that he'd coached at USC, because he knew them well enough to know he didn't want them to come play in Seattle.
Right. It's got to hurt. It's got to hurt real bad. But more back to this idea of, like, what has changed in the philosophy. I think, as you're saying, they have not changed their philosophy, but I think what has changed is it's become more competitive. They've lost their coaching staff. Their coaching tree has expanded. Dan Quinn is a head coach. Gus Bradley's a defensive coordinator. Chris Richard is a secondary coach. There's all these guys that bought into the Seahawks defensive scheme, and now all of a sudden, these coaches that are familiar with the Seahawks theme and say, like, I'm going to add my twist to it, they still need core guys to do that kind of defense. They need a rangy safety. They need a long and lean corner. They need a linebacker who can go sideline to sideline, and they need just speed off of the edge and, like, really big fatties up the middle to try and turn it into a one-dimensional game. That's kind of the Seahawks mold that we've grown accustomed to. But now these other teams are kind of emulating that, and we've heard stories about other teams saying, like, oh, we want to run a Seahawks defense, but they don't have the personnel. They didn't go through a huge exodus and a huge purge like the Seahawks did in 2010 to 2011. So I think that's what's been more competitive. Other teams are starting to copy and emulate because the NFL is such a copycat league that Seattle can't bank on one of their hidden gems, guys that they want to take. Like, maybe Shaquille Griffin was, a third, fourth round, if he was drafted like 3 years ago. But in 2017, he's a second-round pick because so many people would go after that kind of a skill set, which is what the Seahawks covet. That length, the height, the arm length. Those are things that are all very specific to the Seahawks and the type of players that they've drafted. So I think that's been a huge impact. Just that competitiveness of you're no longer isolated. You can't just be the only one to run it. That's what I think has been the biggest change, because there's not a huge wave of people trying to emulate what the Seahawks are doing offensively, because it's a pretty terrible offense to try and copy.
Yeah.
To get a diamond in the rough quarterback like Russell Wilson, it's like, all right, it's all on you. Like, we're gonna give you one great wide receiver, one great tight end, but we're gonna give you bad blocking. We're gonna give you running backs that don't know how to hit a hole. And you're going to be the focal point of the run game. You're going to score all of our touchdowns except for one. Go out there and succeed. That's a terrible recipe for success, but that's kind of what they've built. So I don't think the philosophy has changed.
Yeah, it's not a great blueprint for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Who's going to copy that?
And if you do, Godspeed. Good luck to you. But that's how I feel. The philosophy hasn't changed, just like you said. The scheme and the way that they've succeeded has ultimately changed, which is hopefully, maybe with a coaching staff change, it will still have a great impact, because we're still going to see Pete Carroll's defense, but maybe Broughton Schottenheimer is going to be able to kind of tweak that offense and be really, really geared towards Russell Wilson and whatever running style they're trying to come up with.
Sure hope so.
Yeah, I got a table here, knocking on wood. We'll see, but I think there is definitely a gap between what we saw, because so many stars came out of those first few years, versus what we've seen. I mean, we're talking about an 8-year stretch here in the NFL, which, even with all that success, it's kind of unheard of, except for a few cities.
Yeah.
Final thoughts?
No, because they all involve stuff we're going to talk about later.
All right, cool. Let's go on to topic number 2. So, topic number 2, are the playoffs dependent on the Seahawks having a stellar draft? And what position do you think they need to address?
Well, I don't know that the playoffs are dependent on a stellar draft, but I think that they are much more likely with a really good draft. I think that this season, more than any in a long time, we are at a point where we would, if we were able to luck out and hit a couple of strong starting draft picks or really good role players, I think that would help our chances a lot going into this season of unknowns We haven't had a season of unknowns like this in a long time. So obviously, the more help you can get, the better. Anything could happen. Obviously, for all we know, maybe we have the guys we need on the roster right now, and with the new coaching, it all works out. But obviously, the likelihood of that is not very high. What position do they need to address? The same positions they always need to address, I guess. Right? We're going to need to figure out who our starters are at a lot of positions, which we haven't done in a while.
Yeah.
I don't know that we can count on drafting those starters. We're probably going to have to rely on some of our veterans to do most of that. I think obviously the offensive line would probably still benefit from some shoring up of some sort.
Yeah.
But again, with Mike Solari back and his coaching philosophies and his system, maybe the guys we have will work. I don't know. I would love to see us, whether it's the first round or not, get somebody that could compete to start at tailback or running back or halfback or whatever we're calling it these days. And another cornerback to compete for a starting job or a nickel job on defense. And I'm always hoping for that next big playmaker, that next Joey Galloway, which are few and far between. But if we were able to get somebody like that, somebody to come in and play 3 or 4 wide receiver and make an impact, then that would be awesome. So those are the kind of things that I would like to see them do the next couple of days.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I'm going to take it a step further and say the Seahawks and the playoffs are not dependent on having a stellar draft this year. It's dependent on having a stellar draft from last year. So the 2017 draft class, that's really what needs to show up, because they drafted so heavily in the secondary. They got linemen like Ethan Posick. They drafted all of these people that I think we need to see them elevate. And that's another thing that I think kind of goes unsaid a lot of the times, is part of that 2010 to 2013 draft classes, not all of them were expected to star right away. KJ Wright didn't start right away. Richard Sherman didn't start right away. Cam Chancellor didn't start right away. So, those are 3 key guys that are fixtures on the defense that were not mainstays until their second year. So the hope is a Tedrick Thompson, a Mike Tyson, a DeAndre Elliott. These guys in the secondary have a chance to kind of step up. That also goes for guys on the offensive line, where Ethan Posick, even though he started at the end of the year, really makes big strides. Aris Odiambu, whatever these other offensive linemen that we have, they make the impacts that will really help solidify the team for the future, which is what we saw early in the year, which is what I think we've been missing. So that's what I think is really dependent. Like you said,
yeah.
to find a diamond in the rough on whatever draft pick they get, whether it's first, second, third, or 7th round, the likelihood of that person being a star, I think that's unlikely. Not to say that it doesn't happen, it's just that it's such a rarity in the NFL. You even look at like a star QB who has a rookie year. It's good for a quote-unquote rookie, but it's never great against other NFL caliber players. So
right, you just can't count on it. It's just, if
right.
You're relying on that, you're destined to fail.
Exactly, and that's the thing. Like, the Seahawks have filled a lot of holes, and I know a lot of people are upset that they've signed so many free agents to 1- and 2-year deals, and they're losing comp picks for 2019. But I think, again, they see the way that this team is built. They like the young guys that they have, and the idea is that those guys step up, so that way it's not this huge drop-off and all of a sudden things are like falling off the cliff. So that's what I feel is dependent on them to make the playoffs. Because, again, they're a bad kicker and injuries away from being a playoff team. It wouldn't be that hard to imagine them in the playoffs last year, as terrible as that season ended. In regards to the position, this is kind of, I feel like it's kind of a crapshoot, because like you said, there's so many positions that they've lost through, trading away or cutting guys, or just not sure if these guys are going to come back, at Cliff Averill, Cam Chancellor, Richard Sherman, Michael Bennett, Jeremy Lane. They don't have a tight end anymore. So there's all these things that like, kind of like come into play. It's really questionable of which is the biggest priority. But if you believe in the idea, which I just talked about, that this 2017 draft class is going to come up, they're going to claim a lot of starting positions, you don't need as much help because, yeah, you're going from a Jimmy Graham to an Ed Dixon. So maybe if you're drafting a tight end, they're fighting for more time with Nick Vannett. I'm not sure what they need the most position help with just because we don't know who's competing. The idea and hope, like you said, if you can get a running back, ideally not with your first pick, but maybe in a later pick to compete with Chris Carson and Mike Davis, that would be great. If you can get another offensive lineman to help solidify that line, so maybe, if Dwayne Brown leaves, you're secured for the year after, or maybe you make a move with Jermaine Ifedi and say, like, we've invested in you and we're not seeing the benefits, so we're going to rotate you in, or you're going to, back up a place. I'm not sure. Maybe they'll get a quarterback. There's a big rumor out there, for whatever reason, that the Seahawks are going to draft a quarterback. So,
yeah.
There's the whole philosophy of like, hey, should you pay money to a quarterback? And my philosophy is always yes, because every quarterback that's won a Super Bowl is paid. You have to go back to Russell Wilson, which is one of the cheapest quarterback Super Bowl winners, and then before that you're talking about like a Joe Flacco. But before then it's few and far between to find a guy that's a quarterback that doesn't make a bunch of money when they win the Super Bowl.
Right.
Yeah,
hey, so to your point about the last year's draft,
yeah,
needing that draft to work out, can I read you a quote and get your thoughts on it?
Yeah, please.
Real quick. Okay, so we were talking about Seattle targeting players in the draft specifically versus kind of just taking what lands to you, what comes down to you, like the players that the Seattle has specifically targeted.
Right.
So Kip, the quote is, probably the worst player Seattle has drafted that they hinted was a specific target was Posick last year. The worst player they've drafted that they basically had targeted and was known that they were targeting.
So I guess it depends on what point are you addressing. Are you addressing the fact that he was targeted and he ended up getting picked, or are you addressing the idea that he was just drafted in general?
The idea that he's the worst one that had that situation, that they targeted him, they got him,
all right,
and that he's probably the worst player that's happened.
In my normal life, I'm not prone to hyperbole. In this podcasting life, I will say that's a bunch of shit. To say that he is the worst draft pick, as a second-round pick, as a guy who started as a rookie and who played both guard and center for you, his rookie year, he's not amazing, but he's not a bust. He's not the worst pick. I mean, there's a lot of other players in the Seahawks history that you could say, like, hey, we really got nothing out of this guy. Like, are you trying to tell me that Robert Turbin was a great pick for Seattle? Other than the fact that he had huge biceps and he was Russell Wilson's roommate when they traveled, I don't know what else you can say about a Robert Turbin. They spent a second, third round on that guy. Christine Michael, that guy was a huge bust. For where he was drafted and the production that the Seattle got out of him, yeah, he came back and kind of redeemed himself, but the dude couldn't switch the ball to his other hand. He only could run with the ball on the right side for like the first 2.5 years of his life. How is that a good thing? And again, whatever Kip's saying about Ethan Posick, I'd like to know more about the details. But that statement by itself, that's a bunch of shit. I mean, you can't say that this guy is the worst bust or worst draft pick the Seahawks have ever had, when there's so many other guys that they've selected that didn't amount to anything, were given multiple chances, or guys that I wouldn't say Malik McDowell is a bust on a football sense, but he's a bust in regards to the fact that the Seahawks literally got nothing out of him.
Right. In fairness, now Kip did say excluding Malik.
But that's the thing, like Malik, that was something that's outside of football. That was a rarity. People do extreme sporting events all the times. JG, eat slowly. Thank you for the notice, but don't choke on anything. We really want you in for the second half. But to Malik's thing, that's a medical thing. That was a freak accident. You know, he wasn't playing Russian roulette with a gun. He went on an ATV. It's really no different from someone going skiing, someone going biking, riding a motorcycle, doing stuff that 20-year-old kids would want to do when they get flush with money, right?
Right.
So Malik McDowell is a bust in the sense that the Seahawks got nothing out of him, but it wasn't a football decision. He didn't play like crap and shit himself on the field once he lined up against NFL linemen. It was terrible circumstances that led to it. And had he not done that, there would have been a huge cascading effect that results in us not trading maybe for Sheldon Richardson, and we'd still have a second-round pick. But I don't know. I need to know more about where he's coming from to explain why he would say that he's the biggest bust, maybe of that 2017 draft class. But I'm not sure that there's enough to warrant giving such a big title when the guy's only played 10 NFL games.
Yeah, it seems unfair.
I mean, maybe he studied the film and he watched him at LSU, even though he was graded as one of the better linemen out of LSU. I mean, he's not the greatest lineman, but he was graded well enough for the Seahawks to take him in the second. So, and I need to know more. But hot take, first glance, I think that statement's a bunch of shit.
I agree. I just, 4 years down the line, if it doesn't pan out and he ends up sucking and he never contributes positively, even then, to call it the worst to me is, it's just hyperbole. It's just not taking into account.
In the Seahawks and Pete Carroll era, who in your opinion is the worst draft pick that Pete and John have had, that have actually played on the field? Maybe they only made it to a preseason game, but who would you say is the worst they've drafted?
God, I don't know. I wouldn't even know. That would take me actually looking at some lists and thinking about it a little bit.
Because the thing is, you'd actually to think about it. You'd actually have to think about someone who actually played well enough or played enough snaps to say, you know what, that guy's just shitting himself on the field. Get that guy out of there, right?
Not out going outside of the realm of Pete and John. The name Aaron Curry comes to mind. That's a guy who was taken high, was targeted, was high on everybody's draft board, was supposed to be the most NFL ready linebacker in the draft. And
he was supposed to be the safest pick in the draft.
Yeah, and he was just, maybe it's embellishing a little bit to call him garbage, but he was never close to what he was supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't know how you could anyone in recent years say anyone other than Aaron Curry, because you saw him play enough to know what production you got out of him based upon the money you gave him, being slotted as the fourth pick in the first round, and the number of years that he played for Seattle before he basically got shipped out for nothing. I can't even remember if they got anything in return for trading him.
What year was he drafted? 2009?
He was drafted, I want to say he was drafted in... He got traded in 2010, so he got traded in Pete Carroll's first year.
So he had to have been around for a couple seasons.
I want to say 2008. I think he played in Holmgren's first year, or last year, and then he played for Mora, and then he got shipped out.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
I want to say, but someone out there probably knows a little bit better.
Anyway, old news.
Yeah, I don't know. We're going to have to get some words going, because worst draft pick... it's chat format, so it'll be impossible to find. But maybe I just have to @ him, and we'll get some more details later.
Oh, I got it. I'll send you the transcript.
Right, we'll put it on Twitter, and people can put their comments in. All right, so let's go to topic number 3. So we're going to do the Homer Corner, and Zeb, we talked about this before we started. But how do you watch the Seahawks draft, and has it changed from the pre-John Schneider, Pete Carroll years till now?
these days, most of the time, I am at a bar with a few friends, 3 or 4 guys. Smoke, if you're familiar, Smoke M2D6.
Yep.
When he lived down here in Portland, we would watch the first round usually together, or we would go meet somewhere when we didn't live in the same city. I had a couple friends like that. A couple guys from the old Seahawks.net. Sometimes we'd get together. This year I don't have any particular plans other than I'm going to watch it myself. But I don't have any plans to meet anybody for it, so it's going to be a lonely one. When I was a kid, back when the draft was on Saturday, Sunday, before all this primetime Roger Goodell Thursday night, Friday night bullshit started happening, and the pre-internet age, I loved it. I would sit there Saturday morning. I would get up early. I would have my pen and my notebook open, and I would chart the draft as it went and keep track of all the players and literally write it down in a notebook. So I'll be before the newspaper was out the next day. I already had my list. I knew what had happened. That might be a little overboard, but that's what I did back then. These days, obviously, you don't have to do that because you can instantly go online and download or look at all the details, videos, interviews, everything that's available about a guy. But yeah, I would say it's been about the same now for the past 10, 15 years.
Okay.
Go to a bar, go to a friend's house with a group and just, watch it as though it's something exciting when it literally isn't.
Nothing's really changed though from John and Pete years and like the Ruskell, Mike Holmgren years.
No, not really. Maybe the people that I'd be with maybe have changed over the years, but nothing specific to the regime change.
Yeah. For me, watching the draft has changed in a couple different ways. One, it's no longer on the weekend, which, like you said, sucks, but I still watch, so apparently I'm the sucker because I will, do my best to watch it. Now, I do want to point out, I asked Zeb earlier if he was going to see the new Avengers movie or watch the draft. He said he's going to watch the draft. So
yes,
I bought tickets to watch Avengers tomorrow. So I'm kind of banking, and this kind of answers question number 2. I'm kind of banking the Seahawks are not going to draft in the first round because we haven't seen them draft in the first round since 2016, and they've only drafted once in the past 5 years. So I'm kind of expecting them not to draft in the first round, which is why I feel a little bit more comfortable going to go see a movie at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. But I think what has changed, also from what's changed from like the current GM front office versus, compared to the Bob Wissett, Mike Holmgren, Tim Ruskell.
Bob Ferguson.
There's 2 Bobs in that draft. They're in that GM front office.
Exactly.
I think what's changed is I feel I have some better level of expectation of what Pete and John are going to do earlier in the draft, where they're just going to trade as many things away as possible. And look who it is. We got JG joining us. He's not joining us on The Voice yet, but he'll click that button. He'll be there. But JG, welcome. But I think what has really changed is the fact that now I know the Seahawks are always going to try and get out of the first round. They're going to try and accumulate picks. They're going to do everything they can to just get a wealth of players because they understand the value of controlling players on a rookie deal is worth so much. Maybe you don't hit as many times because you're taking more shots, but having access to those players young and often, and sometimes, we see them like move on from guys really quickly. That's kind of what's benefits. So that's helped me as a fan say, okay, look, this guy looks great, this guy looks amazing, but we need to see him against competition against other players in the field. And that's where, we saw it with the Russell Wilson in 2012. He was playing, even in game 1 of the preseason when he played in the second half, he looked great. It's just that third game everyone remembers because he started from the first quarter up until the third and just blew everyone away for 2.5 quarters.
Right.
So that's, I think, what I feel has kind of changed I'm not expecting a lot of high draft picks anymore. I feel like they'd rather backload their draft, get them in like the later rounds, get them for a long time, and then kind of like sift through that and say like, okay, of the 12 guys we selected, 6 of them we're actually going to keep. The other 6 we're going to pass on down the road.
Yeah, I mean, we know that they're, based on what's happened before, there's about a 75% chance that they're going to trade back out of the first round, and the fact that we don't have a 2 or a 3 this year makes that even more likely, in my opinion. So that's something that we've gotten used to under Pete and John.
For sure. JG, how you doing, man? Can you hear us? You live?
Yes, sir.
How's it going?
What's up, man?
First off, what'd you eat?
Yes, sir. Oh, dude. I knew you guys were going to ask, and it pains me to admit that I had Taco Bell.
Nice.
Oh.
Did you get Doritos Locos? Or did you get something else?
Nah, dude. I always get cheesy gordita crunches, dude. It's the classic. It's like probably the only thing I've ordered there for the last probably 10 years.
Well, JG from the Northwest is joining us, so welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. But we're going to hit you right away. So we're already on topic number 3. So this topic is, we're going to hit this to you. We've already answered, but we'd love your feedback. How do you watch the Seahawks draft, and has it changed from the pre-John Schneider, Pete Carroll years till now?
Man, so it definitely has changed from pre-PCJS and post-PCJS, because before, and even like, I guess, what was it, 2010, the year that we drafted Earl Thomas, that was still a pretty high draft pick.
Yeah.
But years before, it was, you were hoping that the Seahawks would be taking a solid number 1 guy. It was usually, top 15 picks or something like that. And so you knew it was somebody that was coming out of college that was generally considered a blue chip, at their position or something like that. And now, especially after 2013, when all of our draft picks started really coming together, we started basically not using our draft pick in the first round, either trading it away for Percy Harvin or Jimmy Graham, or just trading back, because when you win a Super Bowl and you pick 32, you're basically 1 pick away from the second round. Might as well draft back a little bit depending on how you value guys. So the way that I watch it nowadays is I usually don't expect them to pick in the first round. I usually just have the draft on in the background basically, or I just have it on. I'm casually watching as I'm doing something else nowadays.
Do you? And this is a question for all of us, because we're talking about the draft. Do you guys get, I don't want to say duped, but do you get sold watching someone's highlight reel? Because I kind of feel like the Seahawks, because they always end up drafting guys that like ESPN and NFL Network aren't really sure about, I feel like they never have tape ready on those particular guys. Do you get sold when you see tape on these guys that the Seahawks draft?
I do.
Yeah, I do too.
I love a highlight reel. You can sell me anybody with a highlight reel.
Yeah, exactly. I'm kind of the same way. I think the guy that really pops out in my mind is Paul Richardson, actually. When we took him out of Colorado, I remember a lot of Pac-12 fans, that were mutual Seahawks fans, whether they, support Oregon or USC or whatever. They pretty much unanimously said Paul Richardson was the only offense that Colorado really had in his year before he came out. And it's interesting when you basically have a defense that's supposedly keying on one guy and he's still lighting you up almost every game, and you never really hear about him because he might not fit the stature because he's a really skinny guy, he's just a speed guy, stuff like that. But then you watch a highlight reel and you're just like, holy cow, this guy's nuts. He make one-handed catches, he looks like he's making Randy Moss type catches on the sidelines, and so I think it's really easy to kind of buy in. And not that Paul Richardson by any means didn't live up to his draft status and where we drafted him, but I think that's kind of someone that sticks out in my mind.
That was kind of what ended up being the thing about him with us, that he was able to make some of those more circus catches or go up and get the ball when I don't know, I didn't necessarily look at him as that kind of guy. So maybe in a certain sense, his highlight reel was right.
Yeah, I mean that catch he made. Zeb, we went to this game together. Like we were kind of confused, but it's that touchdown catch that he had
Against the Lions, yeah.
Yeah, against the Lions. I was just cheering because they got a flag. I didn't realize it got a touchdown until they changed the scoreboard. You know,
Yeah, it literally took us like 30 seconds to even realize that they were giving us a touchdown because we just assumed it was an incomplete pass.
Is he worth the contract that he got from Washington? Eight a year.
Hell yeah, on Crippy.
Yeah, probably. He probably is. I don't know. It's kind of weird to look at the production that Golden Tate has had. Like out in a different system. Oh, cats are pissed off in the background. Sorry, guys.
With Paul, it comes down to injuries.
Yeah.
That was his biggest thing, was just not being on the field.
Right.
Yeah. I think that we've talked about this on previous podcasts, but of the one player that the Seahawks have lost that I wish they could keep, it'll probably change depending on how Richard Sherman and Michael Bennett's careers pan out. But Golden Tate was a guy that I wish that the Seahawks had found a way to keep. Obviously, I don't think they couldn't with the money that was given to Percy Harvin and the way that they had acquired him, but I feel like that's the one guy that we missed out on. But, slept with Russell Wilson's girl, so what are you going to do?
Dude, all I can do is shake my head when I hear people say that, especially when I hear them say it in person, like at work. The Golden Tate, Russell Wilson's.
I don't believe it. I just think it's just funny now to me.
Double crossing, timing.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I don't know. It would say a lot, I guess. High opinions of Ashton from Golden Tate's like girlfriend at the time, because she stuck with Golden Tate, so she was like, whatever.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go on to topic number 4 here. So, topic number 4, the Seahawks have only drafted in the first round once since 2013, and that was in 2017 with Jermaine Ifedi, or 2016 with Jermaine Ifedi. Do you feel that this has been a good or bad strategy for the Seahawks? Because it's turned into a Jimmy Graham, it's turned into a Percy Harvin, it's also turned into more draft picks. JG, I'm going to hit you off with this first. Do you think that this has been good for the Seahawks?
So if we go back to 2013, we think about the way that the Seahawks have used their first round draft picks. Overall, I'd say it's been a bad strategy, and that's kind of been proven with the Percy Harvin situation and Jimmy Graham situation. Not to take anything away from Jimmy Graham's touchdown production last year. That was pretty awesome to see him basically just boxing people out in the end zone and being unstoppable. And actually having 10 touchdowns. But overall, it's like he never really put together a full season, really, with the Seahawks. And then, of course, with Percy Harvin, I think we got rid of 2 first-round picks for him. I think it was like it was a current year and a future year. And so that kind of burned him because we really got one big kickoff return from that. But I would say it's proven to be a bad strategy, but I wouldn't say that overall it's a bad strategy. I think that they took risks on two guys that were, for the most part, pretty proven and like top of the line athletes, and that was exactly what Pete wanted. So I don't know if it's bad luck of the draw. We it's 50-50 and we hit tails twice instead of heads. I don't know.
Ross, Zeb, what about you? What do you think about trading out of the first round and just not having that number 1 anymore?
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of on the same wavelength as JG. Like, I don't think that in theory it's a bad strategy. Now, whether it's been executed to its best potential, that's where it comes into question. Just like JG mentioned earlier about us typically picking late enough in the first round that it's basically a second round pick already. I think it makes a lot of sense to trade out of the first round, especially if you don't have an immediate need that you can only be solved in the first round. I think it makes a lot of sense. And this year in particular, without having a 2 and a 3, to me, it makes a lot of sense to make some moves and get maybe a few higher picks than what we have available to us. But again, it comes down to how it plays out. Now, if you trade out of the first round and that gives you an extra second or an extra third, and you draft somebody who ends up doing nothing, then obviously it feels like a bad a bad decision. Or if you whiff on a guy like, like we could have had Alvin Kamara, something like that, then in hindsight, obviously it's a totally different story. But I think that the strategy is sound, especially if there's not a guy available in your range that you feel like you want. If you don't, then by all means, trade back. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm kind of in between kind of both of you guys, because on one hand, you have to look at it from a value standpoint based upon contract, salary cap, and control versus production. And I think that's kind of where the Seahawks have tried to live this life. They made big plays for Percy Harvin and for Jimmy Graham because those were like, we need these offensive weapons to change our offense, to give Russell Wilson and Darrell Bevell this opportunity. But I think the thing that's bad about it is that because they're always doing it in the draft, they're not necessarily getting the best value. They swap players, they swap picks with Jimmy Graham, they swap ones for Percy Harvin, but they have made great draft trades like Marshawn Lynch. That wasn't a draft day trade. That was a mid-season trade that I think has worked out to the best that anyone could hope for. He's going to be an all-time great for a lot of Seattle fans because of what he did, what he embodied. But that was a draft trade. It wasn't a first-round pick for it. But that's, I think, again, there's opportunities not only in the first round but other rounds. But specifically to the first round, it's really hard with where the Seahawks and the way that the roster is, the way their salary cap is this year specifically. I don't see them holding on to that first round pick because they're going to just fall into that habit saying, like, we don't have a second and third. We need to fill these spots. We need more bodies than the draft picks that we have allotted, and that's the only way that they'll be able to get them. So maybe they'll trade to the end of the first round and then they'll use a first round pick on somebody, kind of like what they did with Jermaine Ifedi. But it's hard when you're always judging things in hindsight, because if we look at the highlight reel, if we predict we're going to go 16-0 and then 3-0 in the playoffs, we'd all love to do that, but it's just not the way the NFL works, which is one of the good things and bad things about the sport, right?
Yeah.
If it were up to you, if you're a GM today, if you're a GM in John Schneider's role, what would be your strategy? Would you always try and get the best pick and use that for a player? JG, what do you think?
Yeah, on something like that. I mean, if it was kind of like this situation, pick 18, and then you don't have another pick until, like, was it 120, fourth round?
Yeah.
Generally, I'm in the boat that likes to stockpile picks. I think basically that's the best way that you're going to get guys. It plays towards the having a young squad, having roster control.
All right, let me flip this up a little bit. Imagine you're playing Madden and you've got the 18th pick and the 120th pick. Would you try and trade up all your lower round picks to get the second and third round, or would you trade that first round to get into the second and third round?
I'd probably trade. Oh man, if it's Madden, oof.
I want to flip it. I want to flip the switch because I know most of us will think about it differently if we're thinking about it in a video game sense because we're not real GMs.
Yeah, totally. And it's like you look at the numbers. You got like 4 fifth-round picks. Yeah, why not trade your fourth and a couple fifths? Get another first or second, or package your first in and trade up to top 3, and then you're getting Saquon Barkley, or you're getting one of the other top flight players.
Zeb, what about you? What would you do if you were Madden GM?
I haven't played Madden since like 2004, so I don't know.
Not much has changed. Don't worry about it.
Well, what I think is that, and I think this is actually pretty obvious. Like, if you're sitting at 18, if there's not a guy or two that you're comfortable that you think will be there at 18 that you really, really want, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to use that pick to get out of the first round or get later in the first round. And then, you do have that large number of late round picks that you can maybe throw in the package to even increase your what you're able to get in return in the the second and third rounds. I think the fact that we don't have a 2 or a 3, and the fact that we're picking at 18, which makes it likely that somebody, there's probably not going to be that guy there at 18 that we really want. I think it makes a lot of sense to use that pick and maybe some of the later ones to, who knows, maybe get a 2 and a 3 or a couple of each. Who knows?
If I'm playing Madden, I am gaming the system left and right, throwing trade after trade to everyone who'll take an offer, and just going to go pick by pick. I'm going to give you 3 picks, and I'm going to move up 2. That's the strategy. Doesn't work in real life, but I think that's a thing that is probably really difficult. And there's all these factors that we'll never know as fans of what it's really like to get into a draft room and really talk about what value this is worth, because this will actually lead us into our predictions. So prediction number 1, JG, are the Seahawks going to trade Earl Thomas? Yes or no?
No.
Zeb?
I think no as well.
So I'm saying no, only because of the latest report is that Earl Thomas is not holding out. John Schneider recently at his fundraiser for Ben's Fun said that Earl Thomas is not holding out, and talks are basically not proceeding. They're not getting what they're looking for, so they're going to expect him to be to camp. So I think that's kind of where we're lining up. So I'm in agreement with you guys. Do the Seahawks trade their first round pick? Zeb?
Yes, absolutely.
JG?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't trade that pick, I think we would all be shocked.
Oh yeah.
All right.
So, the only way I see them not trading that pick, and I mean, I could even see them just trading it down for like a couple spots. But if they still pick in the top 20, it's because some crazy thing happened where 5 QBs were taken in the top 10, and so somebody had to slip,
Right.
And they're gonna basically have 1 or 2 guys targeted that they'll probably say, you know what, we'll basically take a flyer on this guy, and we'll hold off on the later draft capital.
Yeah, I mean, with the way the Seahawks have operated for the past 5 drafts, there's no way they hold on to that first pick, at least the 18th pick, like you said. JG, do the Seahawks draft in the top 50 picks if they end up trading out?
Yes, definitely. I think what they're gonna end up doing is they're gonna end up trading out, getting, and I think John Schneider just said this recently in an interview, or maybe it was at his press conference or whatever it was, but basically said the way they look at the value is they don't see a whole lot of difference between, I think, like the guys at 18, 20 dropping down to like 40 and 50. So they think a lot of those guys are going to be very similar, I think, in kind of talent coming out. So I think what they're going to do is kind of try and hit that sweet spot where they'll get, basically 1 or 2 second rounders and then 1 or 2 third rounders, and probably keep playing the trade back game.
Zeb, what about you?
Yeah, we're gonna pick in the top 50, and I'll go on a limb to say we're gonna pick twice in the top 50. Very likely that neither of them will be in the first, or one of them will be in very late in the first.
I actually agree with you, Zeb. I think they're definitely going to be in the top 50, but they're going to try and get in there twice. All right. Zeb, do the Seahawks draft a starter on day 1 for this draft?
No.
And I'm sorry. Do they draft a starter from any of the draft positions, but they start day 1 of the season from this draft?
Oh, somebody who starts right away.
Correct.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
JG, what about you? Do you think they'll get a starter in this draft?
Starter as in game 1 of the season?
Yeah, week 1 at Denver.
Man, the optimist in me wants to say yes, but I'm going to say no.
So I'm trying to point out. So the last rookie to start for the Seahawks was Shaquille Griffin last year. Was there a rookie that started for them in 2016?
From game...
I don't know.
Game 1, 2015 draft. I mean, Frank Clark's probably the best. He was 2015 draft, if I remember correctly, right?
He is in his 3rd year, I believe, so he would have been the
2014.
Yeah.
Oh, he was 2015.
2015.
Yeah, he was.
I think because
But he wasn't starting though. He
No.
was still behind April and Bennett.
right.
I mean, we're talking Clark, Lockett, Glowinski. Those are the only guys that.
I guess. Yeah, Lockett. If you include special teams, he was immediate returner. And then that was his rookie year. He was Pro Bowl, right?
Yeah. But I think what it shows is that the Seahawks for years and years and years have had a really deep team, so there's not a lot of opportunities for rookies to take that spot. This year will be very unique. It'll be very different, where there is very likely that a rookie can start from day one. I don't know if that person is in this draft or if they're going to be able to select them, but I definitely think it's possible. I'm gonna say no for now. Because the odds of it happening are just too slim.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I agree, and I think part of it kind of goes back to you guys were talking earlier about how the 2017 draft plays out, and we took so many defensive backs that between the guys that we took, Hill, Thompson, I'm trying to think who else we ended up picking up. I mean, picked up Coleman, Tyson, all these dudes, and then you have Earl Thomas, you have McDougald re-signed. I don't see anybody really breaking through there. And then you think about kind of the defensive ends and the line lately, and I just don't see anybody really breaking through from day one.
Yeah.
I don't see anybody stepping up and getting the Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll basketball court treatment.
All right. JG, do the Seahawks end up taking more than 9 players in this draft? They have 9 picks. Do they get more than 9 players?
Yeah, I think they'll ending up with. My guess is going to be 10 picks. They're going to end up kind of maybe 11, but I'd say 10.
All right.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Probably 10, maybe 11. Not likely more than that, but you never know.
I'm going to say they're going to end up with 9 picks because I think what's going to happen is because they want to be in that top 50 in that second and third round so much, they'll trade back, but they'll also move up because they have a wealth of picks on the 5th and 7th round. All right.
Sounds fair.
Last prediction for Zeb, and we'll finish off there. How many trades in total will the Seahawks make on draft day?
5?
Oof.
6? I don't know, something like that.
That's a lot of trades.
Yeah, but come on, man.
I probably should research how many trades they've averaged over the last 5 years, but
I mean, I feel like that's probably about the average, 4, 5, 6. They trading all the time.
JG, what do you think on draft day? How many trades the Seahawks going to make?
So like this is throughout the draft.
Throughout the 3 days of the draft,
yeah,
7 rounds.
I think he's probably about. I'm gonna say. I would say over under is probably like 3.5. So I'm gonna say 4.
You're gonna prices right him. All right.
Yeah.
I see how it is.
Definitely.
I'm gonna prices right you. I'm gonna say 3 because 5 seems crazy, but it's got to be within that range. I think 3 to 5 is a pretty good sweet spot. We'll see of the 3 of us which comes.
I mean, they've done 2 in the first round before,
Yeah,
so.
they've traded out of the second round twice. I mean, that's what happened last year, so it really shouldn't be a shock, right? Well, those are our predictions, and that's our show. JG, because you joined us a little bit late, we didn't get to do an introduction, but if you could, please tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been a fan, and what you're looking forward to in this 2018 season.
Absolutely. Thanks. And by the way, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, guys. My name is James. I grew up in North Central Washington, Wenatchee, Washington. I started following the Seahawks and rooting for them. Like my dad was watching it, back in like early 90s. I ended up having a pretty sweet like Joey Galloway jersey after he was drafted and stuff. And then and this is kind of weird, but I actually really liked the Jacksonville Jaguars for a while, like right after they were an expansion team.
Mark Brunell?
Dude, Mark Brunell, he was the man. It's like, where are all the left-handed gunslingers nowadays?
Right.
Dude, right? But anyway, so I actually liked the Jaguars for a while until the Seahawks ended up getting like Holmgren and Hasselbeck and, Sean Alexander, and then I got more interested in it. I guess I'm a bandwagon fan from like, back in like 02, 03 or something like that.
If you're a fan from 02, you're not a bandwagon fan. They weren't winning that much in 2002.
Yeah. And so anyway, Super Bowl 05, all that stuff. Was a big fan, and then life happens, graduate high school, go to college, stuff like that, and then it really wasn't until halfway through college around 2010, 2011, really after Pete Carroll had been there, and we were making record number transactions, stuff like that. That was really when I started taking notice again, and I had a boss actually at the time that showed me Seahawks.net, and since he showed me Seahawks.net, he couldn't be mad at me for being on Seahawks.net all day during the downtime, So, yeah, shouts to Jordan there. So yeah, that's kind of my fandom and where I'm from and all that jazz.
Nice.
Well, respect, man. I'm glad you were able to come on with it.
Yeah, if you or your dad's rocking a Joey Galloway jersey, that's long time fanhood. So don't even sweat
it. I know it's kind of crazy to think back, because I think he ended up like holding out like one of his last years in Seattle.
Yeah,
and then
he held out for
the Cowboys, I think.
It was the last time anyone had actually traded a franchise player for their valued 2 first-round draft picks.
Wow.
Dang.
Right? That turned into Chris McIntosh and Corn Robinson, I want to say.
Yeah.
So crazy.
Robinson wasn't too bad when he.
I loved Corn Robinson. He was my favorite player for like 3 seasons. That guy was the constant. Oh, if you only could stop drinking and pull your head out of your ass for
right? Yeah.
Saturday night, you'd be great.
His career.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. I mean, he's not Jeremy Stevens, but
Right.
Yeah. Well, now we're going to way crazier draft stories talking about those guys. But yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you speeding. Hopefully, you don't catch up on any radars trying to get home to join us. But it was a pleasure having you. It was great comments. We really enjoyed having you. We love to have you back on another opportunity. Hopefully, our schedule works out better with yours as well. But gentlemen, any final shout-outs?
Go to triplebpodcast.com and refresh it about 37 times.
About 37.
Just 37.
Are we trying to hit a certain number? Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, maybe, just maybe.
As far as shout-outs go, shout-outs to my sweet girlfriend, Catherine Burbank, for letting me stay up until, past midnight.
Shout out to the girlfriends.
Talk some Seahawks. Yep.
Shout out to JG for joining us. Shout out to Maddie for sleeping in. We'll probably hear from him about what happened later on, but maybe he'll be able to come on with us on the post-draft next week. Shout out to Ross, who's doing some business stuff, so even though he couldn't join us, we are thinking about him and we're hoping he's closing all the deals. Looking forward to the draft tomorrow. Looking forward to see what's happening over the next 3 days with the draft. And above all else, gentlemen, check us out on Twitter at Seahawks Podcast. Check us out on Seahawks Fan Table at Facebook, and check us out at our website at hawkscast.com. But gentlemen, thank you very much, and go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.